They say hindsight is 20/20, but what if your entire life was built on a lie, carefully constructed by people who said they loved you? What if every choice you thought you made was never really yours? I used to believe I was smart, secure, even powerful, but the day Kevin walked out and left nothing but debts and deception in his place, I had to ask myself, how did I let this happen? Was I blind, or was I just convenient? This isn't just the story of betrayal, it's the story of how I stopped being a victim and became something else. It didn't happen overnight. That's what I keep coming back to. The unraveling wasn't sudden. It was subtle, calculated, and almost elegant in its execution. Kevin didn't show up one day and demand control. He whispered his way into it, cloaked in affection and charm. "You work too hard," he'd say, kneading the stress from my shoulders. "Let me take care of the boring stuff. You deserve peace." And like a fool, I believed him. Because love sounds a lot like manipulation when you're too in love to hear the difference. At first it felt like care, like partnership. He'd pour me a glass of wine, talk about children and legacy, and paint a future where I could finally relax. "Trust me," he'd say. And I did. Every time he brought a new business plan, a new can't-miss opportunity, I didn't question it. I signed where he pointed, smiled for the photo ops, and told myself this was what a supportive wife did. I thought I was building a future. Turns out, I was funding his escape route. Looking back, the red flags weren't red. They were crimson billboards. When he urged me to step down from the foundation, I thought he was protecting me from burnout. When he distanced me from friends who didn't understand our lifestyle, I assumed they were jealous. When my family raised concerns, I defended him like a soldier on the front line. "You just don't get it," I told them. "Kevin's different." And he was, just not in the way I wanted to believe. Everything about our life screamed success. The house, the cars, the designer trips. But now, I realized those luxuries were never mine. They were smoke and mirrors, props in a story he was directing, and I was too busy playing the role of grateful wife to see the script being rewritten in real time. He didn't just take over my finances, he dismantled my identity, piece by piece. Every time I deferred to him, every time I silenced my own instincts in favor of his confidence, I gave up a little more of myself. And he knew it. That's the part that stings. He saw who I was before I did, and he used that insight not to love me better, but to make me easier to control. By the time he left, the only thing I still owned was my silence. And even that, he tried to take with him, leaving behind a final message. "You're not my responsibility anymore. Figure it out yourself." That was the moment I realized love hadn't failed me. I had failed to recognize the difference between devotion and dependence, between being cherished and being used. But the illusion was cracking, and beneath the wreckage, something was beginning to stir, something fierce, something sharp, something that had been quiet for far too long, and it was just getting started. The silence after Kevin left was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. No more texts about new ventures, no more smooth reassurances, just the cold, echoing reminder of how empty the house and my life had become. I should have been grieving, or raging, or maybe even begging for closure. Instead, I sat in that leather chair, the one my grandmother left me, staring at the unopened bank letter on the coffee table. I didn't need to open it. I already knew what it said. The money was gone. All of it. And here's the cruel irony. I was the one who used to help others. I ran a foundation built on second chances, on rebuilding lives, but I'd ignored every warning sign in my own. I'd let Kevin chip away at my independence, my confidence, until I became a shadow dressed in designer clothes, clinging to a version of love that never really existed. I thought of Catherine, my sister. Our last real conversation was 3 years ago, right before I shut the door on her concern. "You've changed," she'd said. "You used to be so independent, so sure of yourself." I told her she was just being judgmental, that she didn't understand the kind of love Kevin and I had. Now, I knew she had understood it better than I ever did. But sitting there, watching the sun set across my sterile, perfect living room, I felt something new begin to surface. Not guilt, not regret, relief. For the first time in years, I didn't have to pretend. I didn't have to dress up the lie and call it love. The show was over. And strangely, that gave me clarity. I pressed my forehead against the window, looking out at a world I'd ignored for too long. Cars passed. People laughed on sidewalks. Somewhere, someone was having dinner with friends who actually cared about them. And here I was, 35, nearly broke, and completely alone. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid of that, because I wasn't just waking up to what Kevin had done, I was waking up to what I had allowed. That's when I picked up the phone, not to call a lawyer, not to scream at Kevin. I called the only person who had ever told me the truth even when I didn't want to hear it. Catherine, my voice was shaking. I need your help. Her response was instant, warm, steady. I'm on my way. And just like that, the fog started to lift. Because it wasn't just about picking up the pieces anymore, it was about learning how they got broken in the first place, and making damn sure I never let it happen again. When Diana first mentioned a pattern in the transactions, I thought she meant Kevin's fraud, but what she uncovered was far bigger, far more dangerous. As she zoomed out from the spreadsheets, a web began to take shape. These weren't just isolated thefts, they were moves in a game that had been played across cities, across years. And Elena Summers? She wasn't just Kevin's assistant, she was the architect. Diana showed us records of nearly identical financial setups linked to other foundations. Different names, different faces, but the same fingerprints. Shell companies, phantom projects, charitable fronts that funneled millions into private accounts. And always, a woman behind the scenes with impeccable credentials, a polished appearance, and a new identity. Elena had done this before, multiple times. We found stories buried in local papers, ruined families, bankrupt charities, unexplained losses, but no criminal charges, no names, just ghosts. She had walked away clean every time, until now, because this time she stayed too long, this time she got greedy, and more importantly, this time she underestimated the woman she targeted. As Diana mapped out the connections, a horrifying thought struck me. Kevin might not have been the mastermind. What if he was just her puppet? What if she had been manipulating him the same way they manipulated me, feeding his ego, giving him control, making him believe the scheme was his idea, when really she was pulling every string? I wanted to believe that. I wanted to see him as a victim too. But then I remembered the text. It's the least you can do after everything I've done for you. No remorse, no hesitation, just entitlement. No. Kevin made his choices. Elena might have orchestrated it, but he played his part willingly. Still, the fact that there were others, other families, other foundations, that's what made my stomach turn. How many women like me had sat in beautiful homes, blind to the financial trap closing around them? How many were still in the dark, thinking they were in love, thinking they were safe? And that's when something changed. This stopped being about revenge, it became about responsibility. I couldn't let Elena disappear again. I couldn't let her move on to another city, another mark, another life to ruin. We had a window, a small one, but we had something no other victim did. A warning, evidence, and each other. This isn't just about Kevin anymore, I told Catherine and Diana. We're not fighting one man, we're going after a machine. Catherine nodded, her DA instincts sharpening. Then we'll need a strategy. If Elena is part of a larger network, we can't just expose her. We have to dismantle everything. And in that moment, the plan began to take shape. We weren't just going to take them down, we were going to trap them in their own game. And this time, I wasn't the prey, I was the hunter. I never thought I'd say this, but playing the helpless ex-wife might be the smartest move I've ever made. It started as a whisper of an idea, dangerous, maybe even foolish, but the more we talked it through, the more it made sense. Elena and Kevin had thrived on one thing, underestimation. They saw me as weak, broken, the woman who used to sign whatever was put in front of her, and that was exactly the woman I needed to become, one last time. We crafted the illusion carefully. I wore an old designer dress just loose enough to suggest stress-induced weight loss. My makeup was perfect, but not too perfect, just enough smudged eyeliner to hint at sleepless nights. I answered Kevin's texts with uncertainty, asking for help, sounding desperate. Diana fabricated a financial story that looked like I was trying to get back on my feet with bad advice and risky loans. Everything about me screamed vulnerability, and Kevin, as predictable as ever, fell for it. Finally seeing reason, he texted, "Elena and I can meet you tomorrow at the house, 2 p.m. Don't be late." Not my house, our house, in his mind. That tiny word told me everything. He still thought he owned the story, still thought he was the one in control. He couldn't see the trap unfolding beneath his feet. Catherine and Diana went into full mission mode. Surveillance gear, hidden cameras, a borrowed apartment across the street, it all came together like a scene from a thriller. But this wasn't fiction. This was my life, my war. I'll admit, the hours leading up to 2 p.m. were the longest of my life. I rehearsed every word, every expression. One wrong move, one glance too sharp, and it could all fall apart. But when the door opened and Kevin walked in, all I felt was clarity. He looked smug, confident. Elena followed close behind, cold and poised. Just seeing her made my skin crawl. We sat. They presented paperwork. Kevin's voice was coated in sugar and steel. Elena barely looked at me. "I just want to understand," I said, my voice trembling, my fingers shaking. "You always said I should understand the paperwork." And then came the cracks. I asked about the donations to our women's shelter project. I mentioned names of fake companies they didn't know we'd already traced. The room shifted. Elena's fingers paused on her laptop. Kevin's eyes darted to her. And when I dropped the name of the forensic accountant, Diana Martinez, the color drained from his face. Elena moved first, standing abruptly. "This meeting is over." But it wasn't. The FBI agents burst through the door seconds later. Kevin froze. Elena ran, but didn't get far. As they were led away in cuffs, I felt nothing. No victory, no relief, just silence. The storm had passed, but the war had only just begun. Because what we'd uncovered so far, that was just the surface, and the real enemy was still out there, watching. The raid should have been the end. That's how these stories usually go, right? The villains get caught, the hero breathes a sigh of relief, and justice rolls in like thunder. But this wasn't a movie, this was a machine, and Elena was just one gear. As the agents took her away, she didn't scream, she didn't fight. She smiled, a small, smug curl of her lips that said, "You have no idea what you've stepped into," and she wasn't wrong. Because the next week, Diana's discovery turned everything on its head. The real estate holdings we thought were random, they weren't. They were a coordinated acquisition strategy. Properties in major cities, held under different names, purchased using stolen funds. A financial empire built on deception, and every shell company led back to one name, Victoria Pierce, Elena's mentor, her ghost. The true architect behind the entire network. That's when we realized what we were really dealing with. This wasn't about charity fraud or a vindictive ex. This was an operation, decades old, targeting wealthy families, siphoning power and capital under the illusion of legitimacy. They didn't just take money, they built businesses, bought influence, and erased victims with silence and shame. Every woman they targeted was the same, socially connected, emotionally isolated, and underestimated. Sound familiar? I wasn't special, I was a blueprint, but I had something the others didn't, a warning, and I wasn't going to waste it. Catherine and I began reaching out to the women named in Elena's files. Some were still too scared to talk, others were in hiding, but a handful were ready to fight, ready to dig, ready to expose the truth. Victoria Chen, Helen Blake, Margaret Webster, each one had a story, each one brought a missing piece. And together, we started to build something powerful, stronger than any one of us could have imagined. We didn't just compare notes, we built a case. Dozens of fake charities, offshore accounts, forged documents, and compromised firms, a paper trail decades deep. And then, the warning came, a message, no name, just a chilling line. You should be careful who you trust. Not everyone in your little alliance is what they seem. It hit like ice water. Because it meant someone inside knew what we were doing, someone was watching, maybe even someone among us. And just like that, the doubt began to spread, the fear, the fragmentation, the same tactics Elena had used on me were now being used on all of us. They wanted us divided, they wanted us scared, but I wasn't the same woman who cried in a leather chair, staring at an unopened bank letter. I was the woman who set a trap, caught her predator, and lit the first match. And I wasn't going to let them blow out the flame, because now, I didn't just want justice, I wanted the whole empire to burn. The deeper we dug, the clearer it became. Elena wasn't the peak of the pyramid, she was the entry point. Victoria Pierce was the strategist, but even she wasn't working alone. This network was layered, protected, and terrifyingly sophisticated, and now, they knew we were coming. When the message came, "Not everyone in your group is who they claim to be," we had a choice. Turn on each other or double down. We chose the latter. One by one, we met face to face. No screens, no emails, just voices and truths laid bare. We shared everything, our stories, our mistakes, even the evidence they might try to use against us. We exposed ourselves before they could. We stripped away the shame. And in that raw, vulnerable space, something incredible happened. We stopped being victims. We became allies. Victoria Chen's tech team traced the Pierce network's digital footprint, hundreds of data points, overlapping shell companies, fraudulent wire transfers, ghost donors. Helen Blake, the real estate tycoon once burned by the network, mapped every property they'd quietly acquired. Margaret Webster used her late husband's financial records to connect the dots between false investments and real companies, some of them now worth billions. This wasn't just a scam. This was a hostile takeover strategy, family by family, fortune by fortune. But we weren't just collecting receipts, we were planning our counterstrike. On a cool Thursday morning, simultaneous subpoenas and investigative raids hit 12 cities. The news cycle exploded. Multi-state charitable fraud ring exposed. Elena's name was public now, so was Kevin's, but buried in those headlines was something even more damning, evidence that a long-trusted network of legal, financial, and philanthropic advisors had been quietly helping Pierce's organization operate under the radar for years. And then the email came, "Check your foundation's shareholder records." We did. And what we found stopped my heart. The Millbrook Foundation, my grandmother's legacy, was still alive on paper, quietly maintained, and legally tied to nearly every property Victoria Pierce now owned. They'd used my family's reputation as a mask. For years, even before I met Kevin, they'd never just been targeting me, they had been using me. My family was the prototype. Our connections, our credibility, it made their entire operation look clean. They'd even groomed Kevin, it seemed, years before I ever saw his smile across that gala floor. I stood in my office staring at the wall of documents as one last message buzzed across my phone. "You should be proud. You were our best investment." For the first time in this entire ordeal, I didn't feel rage. I felt resolve, because now it was personal. They hadn't just stolen from me. They'd stolen my name, my legacy, my family's trust. And now I was going to take it all back. Every last piece. The real war wasn't fought in courtrooms or spreadsheets. It was fought in whispers, in headlines, in public opinion. Victoria Pierce and her remaining allies launched a full-blown psychological offensive. Anonymous threats, character assassinations, carefully timed leaks to make it look like I had always been in on it, that I was some mastermind who flipped when the heat got too close. Every photo I'd ever taken at a gala, every email I'd ever written while under their influence, now twisted, repackaged, and distributed with chilling precision. They didn't just want to discredit me, they wanted to erase me, but they miscalculated, again, because I wasn't fighting alone. Margaret, Helen, Victoria Chen, Diana, Catherine, we stood together, not as victims, not even as survivors, but as architects of our own damn future. Every attack gave us more reason to dig deeper, to uncover more families, more shell companies, more stories. And the more they tried to silence us, the louder we got. And then came the email that changed everything. From an anonymous account, subject line, "The beginning." Inside were records going back decades, long before I was born, before Elena, before Victoria Pierce, a timeline of manipulations going back to my grandmother's era, and one name kept appearing again and again, Dr. Elizabeth Pierce, Victoria's mother, my grandmother's trusted friend, and the woman who advised her to change her will. I confronted my father. He didn't deny it. "It was supposed to protect us," he said. "Your grandmother knew what Elizabeth was. She just thought she could outmaneuver her, but she couldn't. And now it was on me." We traced everything back to the old mansion, our family's ancestral home, long sold, now listed under a shell corporation linked to Elizabeth, the house where it all began, where I was shaped into a pawn, and where I would finally end their legacy. We set the trap, recorded everything, exposed the real reason my grandmother changed her will, broadcast Elizabeth's confession lived to federal agents waiting outside. It was done. The empire had crumbled, and in its place, we built something new. We rebuilt the Millbrook Foundation, not as a nameplate, not as a facade, but as a real force for justice. We offered legal and financial aid to women taken in by financial predators. We created a network of survivors turned advocates. We turned our stories into blueprints, so no one else would be shaped, silenced, or sold out in the name of legacy. And me? I stopped asking why this happened, because now I know exactly why. It happened to turn me into the kind of woman who would never let it happen again. So what do you think? Would you have seen through Kevin and Elena's scheme? What would you have done in Emma's shoes? Drop your thoughts in the comments, let's talk. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story that goes deeper than headlines. This isn't just drama, it's real, raw, and more common than you think. See you in the next one.